I find the book of Genesis a little peculiar. That the story, obviously, of Genesis is getting us ready for Exodus, that we might know the background of this people who are called out of Egypt and into this promised land. We're kind of getting the background stories to that. And so we hear about the rise of this family. And in some respects, this family is the hope of the world. And as you read the stories in Genesis about this family, Abraham's family, you think this is the hope of the world. Their family life is more than dysfunctional. It's bizarre at times, full of envies and plots of murder and intrigues and polygamy and bartering for who gets to sleep with the husband tonight and trading off things for birthrights and all kinds of crazy things that are happening in Genesis. And we might think, how could this be the hope of the world? Well, it's not Abraham's family that's the hope of the world. It's the God of Abraham's family that is the hope of the world. He's taking this family and he is doing something with them that he wants to do for the whole world. And I suppose we should be glad that Abraham's family is so dysfunctional because our families are so dysfunctional. And I expect if they were somehow perfect, we might think, what do they have to do with us? We are not like that at all. And so their imperfections, perhaps, and their flaws could be encouraging to us because God does not give up on them. He uses them anyway, and he glorifies himself through them. So one of the peculiar stories in the book of Genesis is when Jacob, who is, in many respects, he is the father of Israel by him bearing the 12 children the 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so he is the most Israel of all Israel. And he has a particular occasion where he wrestles with God. And not saying he wins, but he does something like win in this wrestling with God. Who would have thought that you could wrestle with God or even an angel, which is probably more literally what happens, and expect to win? Well, let's look at this story. We find it in Genesis chapter 32. In Genesis chapter 32, we hear the tail end of the Jacob story. It's been going on for a couple chapters already, several chapters already, and now it comes to a head in some respects. Hang on, I brought the wrong remote. As we enter into chapter 32 of Genesis, we need a little background of the story to make some sense of it. We're kind of picking it up quite a far through the story, in fact, towards the tail end of the story. And in order to understand what's about to happen in Genesis 32, we need to get a sense of what's going on before. In that Jacob has had many struggles with people. In fact, his name itself comes from the idea of some kind of struggle. When he's born as a twin with his brother, as he is born, he comes grabbing the heel of his brother. And there's something about that in Israel's mindset is something that's kind of strange about that. And something about the heel, something about grabbing on. And so Jacob means to supplant. And that's basically Jacob's life. And early in his life, he has a couple of encounters that create great family stress. One is he takes advantage of his brother Esau's weakness. His brother is extremely hungry and weakened, and Jacob sells him a pot of food for his birthright, which is an extremely foolish kind of transaction. Hebrews blames Esau for being profane. But we also read, should Jacob even have done it? Had you no kindness to your brother that you wouldn't feed him when he's hungry? To take advantage of somebody in their weakness and even in their foolishness creates tension. And then later, Jacob, by the conniving of his mother and his own conniving, when his father is blind, he pretends to be his brother and goes in towards his end of his father's days when he's blind, and he deceives his father into blessing him as if he is the firstborn. when Esau finds out about this, he is extremely angry and vows to kill his brother. Notice, if you could, keep your finger in chapter 32 and look back at chapter 27 and verse number 35. When Esau realizes what his brother has done and pretending to be him and stealing in some kind of tricky way, deceptive way, when Esau finds out, his father Isaac says to him, verse 35, but he said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. And Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob, supplanter? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now, look, he has taken away my blessing. So Esau becomes extremely angry and determines in his heart he's going to murder him. We hear that in verse 41. So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob. And the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah, so she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran. So that's kind of Jacob's life character. He gets things done through any way possible. By hook or crook, he's going to succeed. And he uses God to do it. He kind of manipulates the situation, takes advantage of providence. If we could think of God's providence creating these things, he takes advantage. And so he does these things. He wants God's blessing. He wants to succeed. And he does so. He does succeed. Of course, at the cost of his brother hating him enough to murder him. So from here, Jacob leaves the land for a land above north of Haran, and he's going to leave this land where eventually there's going to be a promised land, but now he leaves it. And when he goes there, he meets Rebekah's family member, Laban. And there he has the same kind of tension. In some respects, Jacob is blessed. On other hands, he finds a way to be blessed. He just he's clever. He's conniving. And so he and his father-in-law have a stressed relationship because of, Laban's not such a great guy, and Jacob's not always a great guy, but Jacob kind of comes out on top. Somehow Jacob keeps winning these battles. And we're not quite sure we always understand how God thinks about this, because we might think God would rebuke Jacob sometimes, but we don't always hear that. But Jacob does tend to win. So one of the stories of Jacob's life is he's used to winning. I don't know if you have a family member that wins, that they're the best at getting what they want. And Jacob's like that. He's a guy that finds out a way to prevail. And he's blessed by it. And by the end of this up here, where we're getting close to chapter 32, he's very wealthy. He has a flock. He has herds. He has something like 4 wives, 2 wives plus 2 more. He's got lots of children. He is just a really blessed guy, and he's found a way to be blessed. Of course, God also has been the one blessing him. And so we're kind of wondering, what is this relationship between God and Jacob's prevailing? Jacob is being blessed, but he also is prevailing over others in being blessed. Towards the end of the story here in chapter 31, Jacob is so rich and so full, he can basically live on his own. He doesn't need his father-in-law anymore. And so he's afraid of his father-in-law, so he takes off without even telling his father-in-law. His father-in-law's off doing something, 3 days journey, and so Jacob's like, this is my chance. And so he takes off and he leaves with all of his family, with Laban's 2 daughters, with all of his grandchildren. And Laban finds out about this and is like, what is this guy? And so he runs off after him angry and kind of threatens his life. And God confronts Laban and says, don't say anything to him, good or bad. Let's make peace. Actually, Jacob and Laban have a pretty good conversation, and they kind of, through some tough words, kind of iron things out. They build a little altar, and that relationship seems to be settled for now. So now Jacob is going to head back to what we call the Promised Land. He's returning to the Promised Land, and here's where we want to pick up our story more in terms of the text in chapter 32. Before we get to chapter 32, we might remind ourselves of what's happened when Jacob had left the land, because it kind of is strategic for knowing what happens when he comes back to the land. In Genesis chapter 28, as Jacob was leaving the land to go up to Haran to meet Laban and marry his daughters and those kind of things, on the way out of the land, in chapter 28, we hear something interesting. If you look at Genesis 28, verse 13, and behold, the Lord stood above it, this place where he was, saying, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and of God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep, this is a dream he's having, and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Then Jacob arose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, which means house of God in Hebrew. But the name of that city had been Luz previously. Thus Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. If I'm blessed enough to survive and I come back to this place, I'm going to name God as my God. And this is the house of God. This is the gateway to the house of God. It's the access. There's this ladder of some kind extending to heaven, and angels are ascending and descending. And he hears God meet him at this point, and God says, I'm going to give you this land, and I'm going to multiply your descendants. And Jacob says, if it's so, then God is my God. And he builds a pillar there. Well, after this whole scene with Laban and the marrying and having children and getting more and more flocks in various ways that we kind of wonder how totally honest it is, but he's very wealthy, then God tells Jacob to go back to the land. If you look at Genesis 31 in verse 11, then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift your eyes now and see all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Those are the ones that God had blessed from Laban's flock. Jacob was able to gain all these flock this way. Verse 13, I am the God of Bethel. That place, as he was leaving the land, that he met God, and God gave him this promise, and he said, this is the gateway to God's house. He says, I am the God of Bethel. That place that you were, I'm sending you back there, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise and get out of this land and return to the land of your family. And so God's like saying, remember that promise you made. Remember that promise that if I kept you and if I allowed you to return, that you would be my child and I would be your God. Go back to that place, go back to the land. So that's kind of the background story. And so Jacob's going to pick up his stuff and he's going to head back to the promised land where, as he left it, God had met him and gave him these amazing promises. So now Jacob's heading back. And as he's going back, the chief thing in his mind is my brother lives near here. And when I come back to my land, my brother's going to be like, oh, remember? Remember what you did to me? Do you remember my anger? And Jacob's remembering this, and he's afraid. And he's like, God has told me to go back, but if I go back, I'm coming back to a place where someone wants to kill me. And Jacob is a bit in a bind here. And he gets to the edge of the promised land, just outside the promised land on the river, on the stream, Jabbok. And he's there on the edge of the promised land, and he's full of fear about going any further because he knows he's going to run into Esau, his brother. And he remembers not only what Esau promised, but probably what Jacob deserved. He had been cruel to his brother. He had been conniving. And so while you can win by hook or crook and by conniving, you can't control the way people respond to you when you do it. And don't be surprised if you're kind of sneaky and people don't like it very much. He's just made peace with his father-in-law after some sneaky things between them, but now he has this other conflict that's waiting. And he's afraid that what he has sown, he's going to reap. And so this is kind of on his mind as he gets close here. So look at verse 1 of chapter 32. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Now this is what in literature we call an inclusio, where two similar events are bracketed by some story. When Jacob left the land, he was met by an angel and the presence of God. Now as he comes back to the land, he's met by angels again. They're kind of like guarding the land. They're like the gatekeepers of the land. This land kind of belongs to us. We're going to decide who lives here. We're going to decide who enters here. And so as Jacob comes back, he meets these angels at the edge of the promised land. And he waits there and he camps there. And he names this camp. In verse 2, when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim, or two camps. Now, he has Esau, his brother, on his mind. And he's trying to plot, how do I get through this? How are we going to arrange this? And so in verse 3, and then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Speak thus to my lord Esau, thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in his sight." So basically, Jacob's saying, okay, I'm back in town, I'm back in the area, here's what I've been doing, I've been blessed, I have a lot of produce, and I'm coming back. I haven't really been avoiding you, but I'm getting ready to meet you again. Verse number 6, then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you. Oh, he's been looking out. He's got messengers, he's got the lookouts, and they know he's coming. And Jacob hears this, and obviously there's a little more fear. He's coming, and then the next thing puts the fear off the charts. He's coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. 400 men suggests an army. It suggests a military expedition. And so Jacob concludes by this that it's up. You know, my brother is angry with me, and he's sending 400 trained men to come. And so Jacob is, God's told him return to the land. These angels are keeping the way from the land, and now Esau is coming to meet him. But we shouldn't neglect to think that maybe there's an association between the angels and Esau. They seem to come about the same time. And I expect we ought to combine his family troubles with his angel troubles, or at least angels present there. So this fear drives Jacob to do a couple things. One, it causes him to divide his people so that if there is some kind of attack and massacre, that one half can be safe and the other half can get away, or at least have more opportunity to get ready for this. And so he divides his family and his possessions into groups to make a little more difficulty in conquering them all at one time. So in verse 8, and he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. And the other thing that his fear causes him to do is to pray, which is a really good thing to do. We might have wished that Jacob had been praying long before now. We only have one other kind of prayer, and it's that oath he made, which is basically saying, if you bring me back, you'll be my God and I will pray. We haven't really heard about praying since then, but now he's afraid and he does pray, which is a good thing to do. Verse 9, then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. So he's reminding God, you're the one that told me to come back here. It was your direction that you sent me back, so I'm only obeying you here. And I don't know what your plan is yet. My brother is coming, we think, to attack me, but you told me to go, so I'm nervously obeying you. And yet I'm calling out to you. And then he has a moment of great humility, at least before God. Verse 10, I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and all the truth which you have shown your servant, for I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now have become two companies. We're going to have even more reason to think this now, but the little hint here that maybe Jacob's learning some humility. Maybe something's happening in him. He's no longer just boldly doing what he needs to do. He's tenuous. And he recognizes what I have not deserved. My life has been by the mercy of God. And as he gets closer back to the promised land, he's realizing that God has been very gracious to him. God has been merciful to him. And he's giving honor now by submitting himself before this God. And then he cries out for deliverance in verse 11. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. So he cries out now for deliverance in his prayer. And then he reminds God of God's promise that he had made to his fathers and to himself when he had left the land. Verse 12, for you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. So he now is crying out for God, I'm obeying you, I'm afraid, protect me, and remember, you promised that I'm not only going to live, my family's going to live, and I'm going to have a promised land. I don't quite see how that's going to work right now with the threat that my angry brother is bringing to me, but I probably deserved it. I didn't treat him very well. I have not been always a very good man. And I've been irritating people, and now I'm reaping the consequence. If you irritate people, they're not going to like you very much. And so Jacob's like, all right, you said you're going to bless me, but I'm a sinful man. In order to get ready to meet his brother, he takes aside a large portion of his possessions and he sets it aside as a gift to his brother. In verse 13, so he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau his brother, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 foals. So a couple things we learn from this. One is Jacob is wealthy. He has a lot of possessions. He can afford this. This gift here is a kind of a tribute. There's actually records from the ancient world that whole countries were not expected to give that much in terms of tribute in order to give. So Jacob's acting like a whole country here. He's better than a whole country. He's giving a tribute to make peace with someone, to honor them, to appease them. And so we learn he's wealthy. Also learn there's something of a request for peace by giving a really large gift. On his way, we find that Jacob not only is praying, but he meets A man, which probably is a word that means person or individual, can mean literally man, but it can also just mean an individual, which is probably how we should really understand it here, because it's probably an angel that he meets, but called a man here. And so as this whole encounter is being worked out, Jacob meets an opponent of some kind. He's manipulating his family to try to keep them as safe as he possibly can. He puts them on sides of the river to get a little protection from the river. And then he's left alone in verse number 24. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip. And the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, saying, "Tell me your name, I pray." And he said, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, which means face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So what's going on here? What are these angels doing? Well, this story reminds me of two other times in the Pentateuch that God sends somebody somewhere and then stops them from going. It's a little peculiar. You would think if God sent you somewhere, you would just go and God wouldn't resist you. But here, this angel is keeping kind of guarding the way. Those two times, I think, can be informative of what I believe is going on here. The one occasion that this happens is in Exodus chapter 4. Look with me at Exodus chapter 4 and verse number 19. Exodus 4 and verse number 19, "And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, 'Go, return to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead.'" So God's telling Moses, "Go to Egypt, I'm sending you there." But notice what happens in verse 24. "And it came to pass on the way at the encampment that the Lord met him and sought to kill him." And you're like, God, you just spent all this time talking with Moses, giving him instructions. You sent him there. You told him he's going to be successful. And then when he starts to go, God tries to kill him. And you think, what's going on here? Well, we're not totally sure we understand what happens next, but I don't think we have to totally understand to kind of get the idea. The next thing that happens is his wife Zipporah took a sharp stone, cut off the foreskin of her son, cast it at Moses' feet, and said, "Surely you are a husband of blood to me." Verse 26, so he let him go. Now, we don't have to totally figure out what happened here to know that it wasn't that God didn't want Moses to go, it's that there was some problem with Moses that hadn't been addressed yet. There was something between him and God. God's saying, "I want you to go," but he's also saying, "But not like you are. Go, but something needs to be changed." Maybe it's because he hadn't circumcised his son. Maybe he'd never addressed the problem of killing the Egyptian and had blood guiltiness. We're not even sure. We don't need to know except this basic thought, that God wanted him to go, but he also wanted him to change before he went. He wanted him to be a different kind of person. Something similar in that same kind of story, drama, happens in Numbers chapter 22. Look at Numbers chapter 22. In Numbers 22, there's some kind of hard to understand, kind of tricky prophet things going on, where a king wants to curse Israel, who's kind of on his borders, and he wants a prophet to curse him. But this prophet, who's not a very godly man, has enough respect to know he only can speak what God tells him to speak. And so this king basically wants to pay Balaam to curse Israel. And God doesn't want to curse Israel. But Balaam kind of wants money. But he also has to obey God. And there's a little trade-off of God saying, don't you dare go with them, don't you dare go with them, don't go and curse them. And finally, God says, go. We read that in verse 20, Numbers 22:20. And God came to Balaam at night and said to him, if the men come to call you, arise and go with them, but only the word which I speak to you, that you shall do. So Balaam rose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went with the princes of Moab. So God says, go with these men, and he goes. But notice verse 22. Then God's anger was aroused because he went, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. And he was riding on his donkey, and the two servants were with him. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, and the donkey turned aside out of the way and went into the field, so Balaam struck the donkey and turned her back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards, with a wall on this side and a wall on that side. What's going on here? God told Balaam, go and do this. And then he said, if you go any more, I'm going to kill you and your donkey. And you're like, what? Does God want him to go or not? Well, if we kind of see what happens next, we get the same kind of idea as the Moses story. In verse 32, and the angel of the Lord said to him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to stand against you because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely I would have killed you by now and let her live. And Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know you stood in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back. Then the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, go with the men, but only the word that I speak to you, that you shall speak. So what's going on here is God wants Balaam to go, but he does not want him to go as he is. There's something about Balaam's motive, something about Balaam's plan, something about Balaam that God says, I want you to go, but not like that. So I think that's the way we need to understand what's about to happen in the Jacob story. God's telling Jacob, go back to the land, but not like you are. And his angel stands in the way, and they're wrestling together. And a lot of things are happening in this wrestling. There's this tension that's happening. Is Jacob's afraid to death? He wants God's blessing. God has promised a blessing, but he also doesn't want to be killed by his brother, who he greatly offended and irritated. So all this stuff is happening in this wrestling. Now, the wrestling itself is it's kind of a little hard to grasp exactly what's going on. I don't think I can totally grasp, but I think we can think a couple things. First of all, Jacob is about 95 to 97 years old. To think that he is wrestling anybody is a little bit of stretch of the imagination. And it's an angel, and when the angel actually wants to win this, he just kind of reaches his hand out and boom, zaps him, dink, and then he can't walk anymore. He's great. So this wrestling match it's not like Jacob is physically overpowering this angel. What is going on? I think it's clear that Jacob actually is not afraid of this angel. He likes this angel. He needs this angel. And he knows the angel has mixed motives. He wants something out of him, but he also wants him to wrestle him. And so he allows this to go on. And the angel also doesn't want to be seen. It's dark. And we kind of hear in the story, the sun sets on the horizon. It's going to get closer where he could see this angel and see what he's like, see who he is. And this wrestling's going on all night. What does Jacob want in the wrestling? Jacob wants a blessing. Verse 26, and he said, this is Genesis 32:26, and he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. He wants to be protected. He wants to be assured that his brother is not going to have his way and kill him. Who wins this wrestling match? I don't know if I know how to answer that question. Both people will win, but Jacob loses. I think we need to say ultimately Jacob he wins by losing, let's say like that. He needs to be blessed, but he can't make God do what he wants God to do. Jacob's been used to winning with people. He's been used to getting his way. He's been used at forcing God to give him what he wants. And it's made him clever, devious, and it's also made him awesome to other people. God wants to bless him, but God also wants to change him. He wants Jacob to pray. He wants Jacob to seek him, but not in the way that Jacob wants. So this is, I think, very relevant to us because we want God to bless us, and we want it on our terms. God, bless me, give me what I need, put my brother in his place. But God's like, whoa, I want to bless you, but not with your attitude, not with your disposition, not with your deception, not with your striving against men and so irritating them, that I want to bless you, but I want to change the way you think. And now Jacob is in a place that he can't possibly win on his own strength. He can't figure out how to avoid his brother. He can't overpower him in battle, and there's no sneaky trick by which he can think. And so Jacob is coming to a place in his life, if I know God and I need him to bless me, how am I going to get this blessing? So what he does is wrestle, and what he does is wrestles until he loses. And when he loses, God blesses him. When he finally, the angel decides this is enough, he conquers him by wounding his hip and creating a custom in Israel that a certain part of the hip is never eaten because of this memory of him. And then Jacob realizes that he's seen God himself. He's seen, we think, the angel of the Lord. And he has lived, and his life is preserved because of this wrestling. So Jacob is victorious by wrestling, but losing the wrestling, but being transformed in the process. Now, how do we know he's transformed? Because that's the meaning of name changes in the Bible. In verse number 28, verse 27, so he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. So this is the moment of definition of his life. This is now a defining moment of who he has become. And name changes tell us two things in the Bible. One, who's in authority. If you have someone's name, it's a way of saying, or you give someone a name, it's a way of saying I have authority over you. I exercise dominion over you. I'm giving you your name. The second thing names mean, especially when they change, is a reflection of a character change. And I believe what happening here is God's telling Jacob, I'm changing you. I've been using your struggles, all the conflict you've had, all the tension you've had, your family mess, the agonizing, fearful relationship with your brother. I'm changing you. I'm changing your approach, and I'm blessing you, but I'm also giving you a new character, or acknowledging your character has been changing. And so it's a transformation. Jacob's we can already tell he's afraid enough. He's kind of like Ebenezer Scrooge. He's stubborn. He doesn't want to change. But if you get scared enough, it's amazing how much better of a person you'll become. Flannery O'Connor has a book like that the main character, that there's this bad guy that's holding people hostage, and he's threatening their life. And towards the end of the book, this bad guy says to the woman, he says, you know, if you had someone at your knife all your throat, you would have been a really good woman. Yeah, we tend to get better when we are threatened, and when we kind of realize, I can't stand on my own here. And so Jacob's kind of come, you know, I've not been a very good man in some respects. God wants to bless me. And God's saying, I'm changing your name because you need to be transformed. And you're not getting into that land. You're not going back to that land. You're not going to pervade that land until you recognize you need a new name. You need a new character. So, Jacob wrestles with God. He's been wrestling with everyone. And he both loses and prevails. Reminds me of one of the articles in C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. In Screwtape, the junior demons are kind of learning how to tempt this man, this Christian. And one of the things that Screwtape says in this advice he's giving, he's kind of revealing the way God thinks. And Screwtape says to Wormwood, this junior demon, says, when God talks of losing themselves, he means only abandoning the clamor of self-will. When God says you must lose yourself, he means you should lose your self-will. You should lose your antagonistic, conniving attitude. Losing of self-will, once they have done this, he really gives them back all their personality and boasts that when they are wholly his, they will be more of themselves than ever. I think that's what's going on here, is that Jacob's learning to lose himself, to lose to God, to surrender self-will, but to find out that he becomes everything he always hoped he would be, but couldn't get it because God can't give you until you release what you've stolen. He can't control God, and when he looks back, well, you can win over people by all kinds of different means. You can threaten them, you can bribe them, you can humiliate them, but you really can't control their response to you. If you're going to get along well with people, you need to treat them with dignity, you need to treat them with respect, and you're going to have to trust God to do that. Jacob can't control other people. He needs God to be the God of his relationships. And here he secures God's blessing by asking for it, but in the end admitting he can only get it if the angel chooses to give it to him. And we can only get from God if God chooses to bless us. It's by God's grace alone that we can grow in God. And he needed to have his character transformed. And I believe he's beginning to think, I am changing. And this moment is convincing me God has changed me. He called me to be a new kind of person. And so now he sees God's face and lives. In many respects, I think this is the story of Israel. It's Israel's wrestling. It's their family difficulties. It's their both being unjust, but also being promised a blessing, demanding the blessing, and God saying, well, I'm not blessing you until I transform you. But you see my face and you live. That's the point of the story. God's grace conquers the waywardness and the conniving works of men. The story ends with something of a repentance. Notice in chapter 33 where Jacob finally encounters his brother Esau. In verse 1 of chapter 33, now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in rear, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. Now I won't take time to go back and read, but when Jacob had stolen Esau's blessing, his father said to him, may your mother's sons bow before you. And so now it's not Esau that we expect to be bowing before Jacob, it's Jacob bowing before Esau 7 times, saying, I pay homage to you. Jacob's repenting. I stole your honor, I give it back to you. I stole what I took. Now, the blessing should be you bowing to me, but I'm going to bow to you. And then he has his family do the same thing. In verse number 5, he lifted his eyes and saw the women and children and said, who are these with you? So he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down. Afterward, Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. What's happening here? Jacob and his family are repenting of their stealing. They're saying, I'm paying back the stolen honor. And then, of course, he gives him this great treasure of goods. In verse number 8, then Esau said, what do you mean by all this company which I met, and he said, these are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. He's talking about these 200 sheep and all the other great riches. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. And Jacob said, no, please. If I have now found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I've seen your face. So he's saying, I think what he's saying is, I'm paying back what I stole from you. I stole a blessing, and I've been greatly blessed. Here, take it back. This is for you, and don't say no. I must do this. It reminds me of Zacchaeus, who, when he met the Lord, he insisted on giving back 4 times the amount that he took. He gave all his goods to the poor. It's kind of what Jacob's doing here. He's paying back the stolen blessing and honor with respect. And when he sees his brother's face, in verse number 10, receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. He had wrestled with God and saw his face, and now he sees God in his brother's face. It's great when brothers live in unity, right? It's troublesome when they fight, when they hate, when they're in tension, when they rob from each other, when they go on through life and they can't stand each other anymore. And God's working is not just between us and God, it's between us and God in the way that we treat other people. And God's restoring his relationship, and basically God's saying, you're not going to get along with me until you get along with him. And when you get along with him, I'll let you come back to the land, because now you know how to live with people. Now you know how to trust me. I'm going to take care and bless you. You don't have to steal to get my blessing. You don't have to be so creative. You don't have to be Jacob. You can be Israel. You can wrestle with God, lose, and live. So what do we learn about God from this? Well, to know God means to know your sin. You don't really know God unless you see your sin. The more that you know God, the more your sin is going to become before you. And you're going to realize all the things that I used to think I earned or were my right, I didn't deserve them at all. I have them by the mercy of God. And so when we come before God, when we truly know God, we're going to be struck by our unholiness. We're going to be struck by the mercy of God. I have not gotten what I deserved. In fact, God's been very patient and merciful. And what I thought people mistreated me was really a result of my own misconduct. It changes the way that we look at life. Of course, part of this is believing that it's not our deeds, but God's blessing. And God's blessing is stubborn. And so to know God means to know and to believe that he has made great promises. And those promises are undeniable. They're fixed. They're rooted in God's character. And we might think that it's impossible for us to lose them, and that's very true. But we also might think then we can live any way we want. But that's not the way Israel learns about God. He learns that he needs to be divested of his self-reliance. Jacob has been self-reliant. He's been self-assured. He's been using his own creative ways of getting his way. He needs to die to that. And I believe in this incident of both being afraid of his brother and of meeting this angel that won't let him go in the land without doing business with him, so we also learn that we don't know God until we die. Jesus calls us to take up our cross. If any man desires to come after me, let him take up his cross, to die. And we don't live until we die. We want our old life, and we want God to bless our old life. And God says, I'll bless you, but you must die. You must die to self, and let me be everything. Just give up all that old stuff that you thought, here's how I have to live. In order to get my way, I'm going to fight with my brother. I'm going to, find some way to move up in my family and get blessings. And God says, you need to die to all that you might live. And then it means to have peace among brothers. The church is marked not just by knowing God, but by a remarkable peace and love among others. In our old self, we find getting along with others hard to do. People irritate us. They steal from us, we steal from them. They say hard things about us, we say hard things about them. The church, though, is doing such business with God that we die to that self-fighting, that thing that causes us to be so upset. We give it to God, And then we find the ability to have peace with our brothers. And what a beautiful thing here is that God has already softened Esau's heart. Esau has not come to destroy him. In fact, has come to come, and he falls on his neck and he kisses him, and he's glad to see him because God indeed has been working. Jacob couldn't see it until he surrendered his self to God. So what does it mean to know God? Surely it means to seek blessing in him, but not on your own terms. We know God by knowing he must bless it, but not by us keeping our old ways, to letting God's love be in charge, by letting God's love be supreme. And God does not want us to fight with our family. He does not want us to cheat. He does not want us to do whatever we can to get ahead. He wants us to trust him. And peace among brothers is one evidence, an important evidence that we do know God. I hope that you do. Let's pray. Father, I do pray that we might learn from Jacob's example and Israel's example that we must have you. And you promise great things, but it does not come without changing us. You want to transform us. And you do so by providence, by causing us to wrestle, by us thinking that you are somehow depriving us or someone else is, and then we realize that's not it at all. You're changing us. You're calling us to not relying on ourselves, but to rely upon you, and to be at peace, to trust you. I pray, Lord, that we wouldn't think we know you until we know that surrender of heart, and we know that death to self, and that belief that it has only brought us a better kind of life. And when we do trust you, may we be that way in practice even this week. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You are dismissed.